Well, today marks 5 years since former President Nelson Mandela died. UDM leader Bantu Holomisa joins us now in studio to reflect on Madiba's legacy. It feels like yesterday. I mean, when I see those visuals coming from Kunu and that area around Mthatha, the historic moments that we lived through around this time in 2013 come flooding back to my memory. Where were you? And can you remember what you were doing when you heard the news of the passing of Nelson Mandela?
I was on my way to Pretoria from his house when I was told that on that particular day that Madiba is looking serious. He was struggling to breathe. Then I rushed to his house in Gauteng, and then after I have seen him, and then I left his house back to Pretoria. Later on, I got a call that he's late in that evening. So talking about his last day in Kunu, you will recall that I was one of the people who was roped in by his family to prepare for his last day. And we used to go to union buildings and meet the staff from government departments, where we discuss if this happened now, what are we going to do if Madiba died tomorrow? So his plan, I think it was completed when we started that within 2 weeks, and then it was locked under the safe. Whenever Madiba goes to hospital, we would be called to Union Building to look, to check whether the people who were cleared would be ready, still ready to supply whatever was needed.
So by the time the news hit all of us with sending those shock waves, somehow I suspect that, I mean, you had seen him a bit earlier on. What was your sense of, you know, the space that Mandela was in? Perhaps not necessarily on that day, but perhaps in the days leading up to his passing. Did he have a sense that, you know, to quote a cliche, that his long walk was complete?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Madiba was in pains. I mean, it was not, I couldn't believe that when I visit him in his house, he is lying in bed and he's having support systems. And towards his last days of, as you know, Winnie Mandela, Graça Machel and the family were almost on a daily basis or 24 hours around his bed. But on this particular day, I think they started to press panic buttons. And they called everybody, and you could see that he was struggling.
Let's reflect about the week that then followed, because part of what then happened was, you know, the nation then went into a period of mourning, and from my memory, the scenes were absolutely extraordinary. What do you remember most? What stands out for you in terms of how this event impacted us as a nation, but also at the same time actually brought us together?
Well, there's no doubt about bringing the whole nation together, and also the world descended to South Africa. And I still remember when we were preparing for the memorial service as well as the funeral in Kunu. A memorial service was, as you know, held in Johannesburg, and then I had to fly down to Kunu to be based in Mthatha, to make sure that everything was in place, setting up that big marquee tent, and also making sure that other marquee tent to accommodate other needs were in place. And that week was very busy, and also the media, as you know, was also here. At least the South Africans were united in making sure that Madiba, who was always promoting unity, is put into rest peacefully.
So I suspect, I mean, it's been 5 years. It's been 5 years. I suspect that perhaps you've been reflecting a little bit about what we lost in Nelson Mandela. Perhaps it must have been really hard in the days after, or perhaps on the day, to capture into words, especially if you describe the kind of, involvement that you had around the logistics of everything. 5 years later, when you reflect, are you able to put into words what South Africa lost?
Well, we lost a unifier, one That's the word I can describe how we have lost Madiba. He was a unifier, and Madiba was always surrounded by all South Africans. It is also the strength of Madiba which is absent today. Where there's crisis, he would summon everybody under one roof and listen, and then later on give a direction. He was a pragmatic person, and if you look at the way he approached the private sector to play their role in developing South Africa, many schools were built by private sector. Even now, as we know, in Johannesburg, we have a children's hospital, and also the international donors. One thing I enjoyed working with Madiba, whenever we traveled throughout the world, he said I must accompany him. He would make sure that he account to the ANC leadership on what monies he has raised. When he was the president, you saw him when he was visited by international superstars. If they donate 1 million, Madiba will tell the world that these people have done A, B, C, D, E. But today, unfortunately, the current leadership of the ruling party, they put the interest of the party and individuals ahead of the nation, whereas Mandela was South Africa and South Africans first.
We could talk about, his perhaps his imprint on our constitutional democracy and some of the challenges that we then faced, to which you were quite integral in terms of getting them resolved. But we are out of time. We are watching a live event that we'll be taking our viewers to in just a moment, that is taking place in Pretoria to remember the late Mendy Msimang, who passed away a few days ago, but also today getting the news that Alex Borain has also passed away. Your quick word of, remembering these two.
Both those two were dignified individuals. They played their role in building South Africa, especially during the TRC era. It was not easy, but Borain, Mr. Dumisa Nsebeza, as well as Bishop Tutu, they put a system together. It might have not been perfect, but at least that system they put in place managed to unite South Africans. So on behalf of my family and indeed on behalf of the UDM, may their soul rest in peace.
All right, thank you so much, General. On that really heavy note, I can't even tease you about how the ANC delegates were singing about you at Nelson Mandela's last conference as ANC president.
When Sam Shiloh said Mandela must open up...
because
Mandela
you've closed all the doors.
Mandela Vula Holomisa.
Thank you so much.
I remember that.
UDM leader Bantu Holomisa joining us here on ENCA now. Well, as we